entire lifetime. But imagine dealing with that level of trauma every single day for your job. That's why many of our nation's heroes do, including our men and women in the military. They are constantly healing their hidden wounds of war. But the Headstrong Project, a nonprofit organization, is combating the stigma of mental health care in veterans. They created a safe environment for veterans to seek healing and treatment for mental health. I spoke with 3 veterans as part of NBC LX's Mental Health Week. They described the warning signs that gave them a wake-up call and made them turn to the Headstrong Project for help.
The moment I realized I really needed to seek out mental health was when my anxiety and panic attacks got so bad that I could not go to the grocery store without, it was to the point where I felt like I was just going to faint. I was going to pass out. And I realized later that's a symptom of PTSD and of like panic attacks in general. Like when it gets to that point, your body's like, shut it down. So that was the moment I realized I really, really need help. And up to that moment, I was really trying to stifle it. Maybe some people here can relate, but I was told, PTSD, anxiety is weak. And especially, from the career field that I was coming from, I was essentially told that I wasn't entitled to have PTSD because, I wasn't kicking down doors and I wasn't doing, anything kind of crazy like that. So, that was the moment that I was like, oof, I really need some extra help here.
Yeah, absolutely. Spencer?
I would say the first time I realized I started to need mental health was after I had actually started going to see mental health. I had been injured a couple times, and so it was not really an option. But after my second round of injuries and coming home and realizing that I was about to have a baby girl, and the fact that I kind of felt zero emotion behind that, that was concerning to me. And so that was when I started to realize that maybe there's some value behind the mental health aspect of things. And thankfully, I had some resources put in front of me that I was able to capitalize on.
Pasha?
For me, the first time when I realized that I needed help was I was at my rock bottom. I just came back from what was my final deployment, where I got hurt for the second time. And just like Talia, I had a panic attack in a grocery store, but that was, I could look past it. For me, I have 4 boys, and I started to see my symptoms in them. I started to see that I was passing my PTSD on to my kids. And that was my wake-up call. Like, I couldn't ignore it when it came to me and what I was doing. But once I started to see that it's affecting others and I'm passing it on to the next generation, that's when I decided that it was time.
Yeah. And Pasha, if I can ask you, you made a comment that you're glad we can have this conversation so people can seek help sooner than you did. If you could go back, when would you have sought help first?
So I medically retired out of the Army in 2017, and I was wounded for the first time in 2005 and second time in 2015, so almost 10 years to the day. After I came back from my first deployment, I almost made a horrible mistake, and this guy kept kicking my chair, and I was flying, and the guy kept kicking my seat, the back of my seat. It was just 2 months after my first deployment, and my brother was sitting next to me, and after my third time asking him, I just lost it. I completely lost it. I got up, I turned around, and I started to scream at this guy at the top of my lungs. And this is on a plane. In 2005, people are still pretty skittish getting on the planes and threatening to kill him and everything. So that was my first real life experience with PTSD. That's when I should have started, but I just blew it off, and I let it. And after that, things I didn't have a big event like that, but it was there. And PTSD, any mental health issue, it starts out very slowly and then it builds on itself. So it continued for 10 years until it took me getting hurt the second time and just completely hitting the rock bottom is when I decided to ask for help. Had I done it back in 2005 when I came back from the first trip, a lot of bad things would have been avoided in my life.
And Talia, I want to ask you, I was telling you earlier that reading about you all's backgrounds, is extremely wild to me. And one thing that I found to be common, whether it was explicitly said or just kind of implied, is that, you all see and experience crazy things, and trying to bring those experiences into civilian life, it doesn't even really seem like there is a normal way to do that. How did you approach that?
Interesting question. I think that what's really tough about anxiety and PTSD, and kind of what Pasha was saying, it just kind of keeps taking from you, and it keeps spreading into every single area of your life. And that's just kind of how anxiety works, to kind of try to, it's a protection mechanism for your body. And you try to make these connections so that you can prevent future trauma. So it just ends up spreading to every single area of your life, whether you're on a plane, whether you're in the grocery store with your kids, at work. It was really tough to bring my past into work, and I was having a really hard time adjusting. I remember I was working for a company, and I had to quietly have panic attacks in our break rooms. And thankfully there were no windows. I was able to just quietly sit and suffer where nobody could see me. So it was tough. And it just kept spreading and spreading. And I think, like Pasha, if I would have gotten help earlier, when I realized that, there was a problem. And I think it really started with this kind of an intense perfectionism that I later realized it was tied to so many things. And I didn't realize until very recently how much was tied up in being a woman in a very male dominated space and wanting to be just perfect on every level. So for me, it's hard. It's hard to bring your full self anywhere else, if that makes sense.
Now, in part 2 of our discussion, we get into the importance of getting mental health care before the emotional load becomes too heavy to bear, and how the struggles of mental health among veterans, they can extend far beyond just PTSD. Spencer, I was sharing with all of you guys before this that I have an Army connection with my dad and my brother. And one thing that I learned is that, and I'm going to generalize, so sorry if I shouldn't do this, but from what I experience, when you're in the military, you have to be focused on the task at hand at all times. And so I read a story about you, how you were injured one day and you were back to work the next morning like nothing happened. And so I wonder if that mentality makes it difficult to seek mental health help, because you have to go back and you have to take time and it doesn't happen immediately. Is that part difficult because it feels like you're wired differently?
Yeah, there's definitely some of that. I am a kind of a firm believer in the servant soul. I feel like a lot of the folks from the military tend to have that servant soul, that servant leadership. And so it's not about you, right? And the military is very good at making sure that we're understanding that we're focused on taking care of everybody, right? We're protecting everyone, and we're protecting everybody's abilities and their rights and freedoms. And so when I got hurt the first time, I'm sure if I would have pushed for it, I'm sure I could have stayed back the next day. But for me, it was, I'm not going to let my platoon go out without myself. And it wasn't that, oh man, without me, they're doomed. It was just this is my family, this is my tribe. I'm going out with them no matter what. And as long as I was physically able to do so, that's where I'm going to go. And so I think there's definitely a lot of that in the military as well, right? Where it's not so much that you don't want to take care of you want to take care of everybody else. And, one of the really important things that I've learned and, going through mental health care and, folks like that have helped me realize is that you can't take care of anyone if you can't take care of yourself. And so there's a time and a place to put yourself first. And that's really one of those important things. And, as a father, for me, I want to make sure that my kids have something to look to. And if I can't even get myself under control, there's no way that I can expect that from them. And so that's kind of the way I look at some of that stuff.
Yeah. And, one thing that I have learned in my life, but also experienced with veterans, is that it's much easier to open up or give yourself permission to if you have community, because you all have a unique experience that the normal civilian just simply cannot relate to under any circumstances. So, Pasha, I want to ask you, because you subtly have the Headstrong up in your background right there. Talk to me about the importance of community and how Headstrong provides that for you.
Well, just community in general. It's we all crave to be understood. Even when I'm at home, the closest family members, they all know what I've been through, but they don't understand what's going on inside of me. So I constantly feel like I have to explain and justify my actions. There's something, it's like, I always feel like some kind of like I'm carrying something when I'm away from other veterans like me. But as soon as I'm around a veteran, it's just like a burden is lifted off my shoulders, because I don't need to explain myself. I feel understood. And Headstrong, there's a lot more to Headstrong than having our community, the access to care. Because we're not here to talk about Headstrong, but just for reference, in 2019 was a rough year for me when I kind of fell off the wagon and I was in a really bad spot. So I went out and tried to get help at Walter Reed, and I reached out in April. I got an appointment in June, which later got moved to July. And after my second appointment, I just could not connect with the therapist. I left in the middle of the second meeting. So it took from April to July for me to see a therapist through the military. With Headstrong, I filled out an application. The next day I got an email. The day after that I had a phone call, and 3 days later I saw somebody. Huge difference. And then the therapist that I saw for a year was just unbelievable human being that helped me through through a rough year of 2020. So that's the Headstrong kind of it's a community for us, but it's also it's instant like a lifesaver that you can grab onto if you choose to reach out for it.
Talia, I was reading a couple of things from you that I feel like are relatable to just anyone, and you were talking about this concept of faking it. How do you work through not faking it? Or is it kind of like, while you are working through, maybe you are faking it until you actually start to feel what you're working through?
I think faking it only worked for me for so long. It worked, when I was working mission and I had to just like have a silent panic attack at my desk. Whereas, at that time, I could control it with deep breathing. And thankfully, my mom has gone through anxiety, and, a lot of us maybe, family members have been exposed. So I kind of knew through her what to do in moments of these, quick moments of panic. But when things started spreading again to like more areas of my life, I started being afraid of more than just messing up at work. I started getting like body, like physical pains and aches and all the scary stuff that comes along with anxiety. So I couldn't breathe. I felt like I could never get enough air. And that's something that I think everybody maybe has experienced with anxiety. It's like, I just can't breathe. I would just feel like I was underwater. Everything was tingling. I would feel just sick. I mean, the range of symptoms just kept growing. And then finally it was like, I would just start to pass out randomly. I'd be in the grocery store and my knees would just like give out on me, and I'd have to get out of there, run, fight or flight. So the faking it lasted, maybe until that kind of like that fainting sensation took over me. I don't advocate for faking it anymore. I think, there are so many instances where you can fake it till you make it. A lot of times we have to do that as women, as veterans transitioning. But when it comes to mental wellness, I think, the best thing you can do for yourself is to get help immediately when you're not feeling like yourself. When you start, when you start getting that tightness in your chest, when you start feeling like you can't function normally, or you can't enjoy life like you used to. So don't fake it. Don't do what I did at first. Get help as soon as you can, truly.
Yeah. Spencer, what is the biggest misconception about veterans' relationship with mental health? And that could be from the outside looking in, what civilians misunderstand, or from the inside looking out, what you think people who are in the military right now misunderstand?
That's a great question. I think it's kind of a two-part answer. I think one of the things that I have started to notice, and I really try to speak out about, is that when folks hear of mental health and then they hear military or veteran, it's immediately PTSD and it's immediately combat trauma. And that's one of the things where it is so much more broad than that, right? It could be depression, just general depression. It could be anxiety. It could be, military sexual trauma that causes, issues from that. And so I think that that's one of those, I guess it's a misconception, like you said, that I hear a lot, where I talk to a lot of folks about mental health care and things along those lines, and in the military, it's always like, oh, it's the PTSD, isn't it? And it's like, well, for some folks it is, I've definitely dealt with that in my time, but as I've started to progress in my own, journey through mental health, sometimes it is anxiety. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the post-traumatic stress. Sometimes it's just work, family. I've got 2 young kids. I've got a family I've got to take care of. COVID has added so much stress to everyone's life, right? And it's just this basic life. Everybody has to deal with this. And I think, on the other end of this, what I really try to focus on and get folks to realize is that from a societal standpoint, for some reason, we have convinced each other that mental health is only in times of crisis. And it's not the case. Like, I am such a huge advocate for mental health maintenance. Everybody is going to deal with mental health in some way, shape, or form in their life. It doesn't mean that they're going to, to your point, Talia, have those panic attacks. It could be showing in a totally different way. But, to your point, right, you would go back and you wouldn't fake it until you could make it. It's one of those where it's like, hey, I'm having some issues. I'm not myself right now. Let me go get some fixing. Let me go get an oil change before my engine blows up, as opposed to just, waiting until you're at that point. And so I think that's one of those big misconceptions I see as well, is that when people start to talk about mental health, it's almost always surrounded by crisis, or the world's ending, or they're at that point where they're suicidal, which is an issue and great time to go reach out and get the care. But I think there's a huge amount of value add in going and getting that care beforehand.
I want to thank all of them for being so vulnerable with me. I learned absolutely so much from them. So now, before we head to break, I want to chat with you guys about the mental health discussion we're going to have after the break. We all